Good morning, everybody. This is Amudan. I am part of Marbakam from Chennai, and we are doing this film screening, online film screening from April, once the lockdown was announced. Earlier, we used to do quote unquote physical film screenings the past 20, 25 years in Chennai and Madurai. And we also do a lot of film festivals, film screenings regularly. Like we are going to have our 22nd Madurai International Documentary Film Festival in the first week of December. Today we have Paramita Vora and the team, 2 members, and I think Abhijit is joining. So we are showing her film, and we will have a discussion with her. Initially, the format is I will just have some questions and comments about the
Mukul
film.
is here. So can I interrupt? Sorry. Mukul and Samina and Jissy. Sankar, who is the editor of the film, probably will not wake up in time, but he said if he wakes up, he'll come. But Mukul was a camera person and Samina was a sound recordist for the film. And they are, of course, well-known filmmakers in their own right. But,
yeah. Yes.
And Jissy,
I welcome you all. Hello, Mukul. Hello. Yes. To start with, let me just ask Paramita. One, as a filmmaker, can you how did you decide to make this film particularly? How do you place this film in your filmography? Is it a continuation to earlier films, or is it different from the other films? How do you look at your own films, and how do you locate this particular film?
Right. So the idea of making the film arose actually from the very simple fact of having seen Operation Majnu take place on television, right? And at the time, it was a very new thing to happen, that there was something like this moral policing incident of police people coming into a park along with television cameras, and this news being all over TV, and of course of the cops beating up the couples, right? And I think it was also one of the first news items on television. Like now, we have become habituated to it, but at that time it felt very shocking to see that it was just this clip of about under a minute that kept on playing in a loop. And in effect, what it would do is, so at that time, my father was sick and he was in hospital. So TV would often be on and be on silent. And you would keep seeing these visuals of violence where young women and men are being beaten up for being in a park together. And so that disturbed me. And it was also alongside the fact that there had been in, say, Bombay, some talk about, there was already a dress code in St. Xavier's College, and there seemed to be a growing language around us. This is in 2006 of what were being called moral policing. You had the Pink Chandi campaign had happened. There was the Sri Ram Sene in the south. There were a number of different things were happening, which seemed to be connected, which now we of course know are connected. But at that time, it was just kind of like dots in the landscape, and I was interested. And so I decided to make the film. But I must say that, before I went to Meerut for research, I had imagined a different film. I had imagined that I would talk to one of the women who had been in the park. I would talk to a cop, and I would talk to a reporter, who I felt were three people in this sort of narrative. But when I began doing research, just reading about the incident, I began to realize two things. One, that everybody who had written about the incident was a crime reporter. And that really intrigued me, because I thought, like, why are crime reporters writing about this incident? And the second thing that I began to sense was that there seemed to be a very big investment of the media in this narrative. It was not something that looked to our eyes organic, that cops have gone in, because that's how we understood news in those days. We felt that news is something that is happening, and then TV reporters have gone and they've covered this organic event. But in even reading about it, it began to feel like maybe it's not really like that. There's something else. And of course, when I went to Meerut, I spoke at first to all the people who had written about the event. Like it began to seem to me that it's more interesting and perhaps revealing even to talk to the people who are talking about the event or constructing this event more than the people who have suffered from the event. Because I was really interested in this mindset of moral policing. And of course, when I went to Meerut and I began to do the interviews, that became very clear with people saying things like, this is a constructed incident. It has been done only for the TV camera. And then, of course, I stumbled upon this idea of love jihad. Now, love jihad wasn't really something that people were talking about at all. It was not a known thing. But one of the reporters told me that, oh, the people who are really pushing for this is this group which is associated with the VHP, and they talk about this love jihad thing. And I was kind of perplexed. And then I went to meet Sandeep Pehel. So I think what emerged for me was like the story of a city and which is going through a lot of changes. It's near Delhi. It's going to become part of the NCR. It is somehow also partaking of many economic changes that we see around us, gated communities, call centers, girls going out to work. So some of the new freedoms of the new economy and also the new possibilities of the new economy, but also a lot of anxieties about a city that is changing, right? I mean, we are all familiar with cities and towns in India, which will be an old city, which is more congested, and these new developments that take place, which also cancel out everything that belongs to the old city in order to justify the new development. So I think the idea of this moral policing and this language of television news that was forming at the time, um, I think I understood that this was really more about numerous anxieties that are woven into one incident, which becomes symbolic and which gets used to assert some kind of a dominant narrative, which I think in the last 15 years since this film was made, we have seen it take on a certain trajectory. And it's tempting to think of the film only in terms of love jihad, but I would really say that what the film showed us, what we saw as we were making the film, that has come to pass over time is that the news, broadcast news, kind of cheaply produced broadcast news, is often about insinuation, that language of Manohar Kahaniya, and it often creates these stories which are not organically news stories or whatever we understand as organic news. Actually, there's also a question about what we think is news and not think is news, or what is political and what is not political. But essentially, this machinery of broadcast news, which allows certain ideas of moral policing and morality to be created in order to endorse certain dominant political narratives, and kind of make a complicated and messy interconnection of the private and the public, sometimes conflating them, sometimes causing a lot of violence to private life as a result, but confusing all of those issues and rights to some extent. So that's really a slightly not very linear answer to what made me interested in the film, because obviously when the film has been made a long time ago, you don't always remember exactly what you felt when you were going out to make it, because so much else happens and you see the film in the light of those things. um, I think in terms of to answer your second question of how I see it in my own filmography, I think it is definitely a film that marked a kind of shift. I don't know that people make breaks in their work life. I think our work life is always, if you look at it, you always see one thing leading to another. And one of the things that I noticed, which I find very funny in my own work, and every editor I've worked with will complain and tell you about this, that there'll always be one shot or one thing that I keep trying to put into the film. Like I'll keep saying, I really want to use this shot, and we keep putting it in different places and it never fits in. And at the end of the edit, we always remove that shot. But that shot always ends up getting used in the next film that I've made. So I feel that's kind of interesting. It's as if to say that while you're doing one thing, you're also learning. In the process of making one film, you're often seeing your second film from the corner of your eye. And sometimes you'll shot something in the first film thinking it belongs there, but really it is part of a growth that is happening for you as you're learning and doing something and interacting with the world, right? So I think like before Morality TV, there was a long, no, not a very long, a few years, but I made a lot of films in quick succession between, say, Unlimited Girls and Where Sandra, where I was working definitely with a kind of style of creating a fictional narrator whom you would see, whom I would play, and mixing fiction and non-fiction. in a very discernible way. Like you could see the non-fiction parts and the fiction parts, and then you could see a part in the film where the fiction and the non-fiction overlap. Like in Unlimited Girls, there was a chat room, but then there were also these enacted advertisements. And then I think that after Cosmopolis, uh, between Q2P and Morality TV, I think, Q2P sticks out for me in my own work because I think it was working with a more conventional form, a form that I had sort of rejected, which I went back to with what I consider to be new learnings from the other experiments I was doing for myself in how to make a film about social injustice using a kind of more traditional documentary style, but not doing it in the same way. But anyway, with Morality TV, I think there were two things that were very different. One is the film was shot in a very short time. It was shot just in, we had planned to shoot for 7 days, but we finished shooting in 6 days. And in those 6 days, we even had a lot of time to eat chaat and talumin soup and gossip at night and all of that. It was a very planned shoot. Like I knew I had written a script and I essentially shot more or less exactly the script except for one thing, which we can talk about later. And even this commentary that's in the film. So I think the commentary plays the same role as the kind of narrator I used to play in other films, which is that it's some kind of a very amorphous and unreliable and strange. It's not the narrator we are used to in documentary films who properly tells you everything, right? Like who tells you facts, who explains everything to you. I mean, I'm not saying voice of God narration. Even, I mean, we have seen other narrative styles, like say, um, which use a poetic form, but it's always very grave. It's always very serious, and it's always you feel like, okay, I can rely on this person. But the narrators that I work with are extremely unreliable because, like for example, I played the goddess Annapurna in one film, and the thing is, you kind of like her. She's sweet, but she's also a little bit silly, and she's pretty vain, and she just always wants to be having a good time. So you start to feel like I don't know how seriously I should take this person, right? So I think like with Morality TV, that is all the more confusing because you don't see the narrator. You only hear and you get the sense that it is a kind of mimicking this Manohar Kahaniya and Pulp Fiction style. But you feel a little unsettled. Like it doesn't ever clarify for you who the narrator of the film is and what they are narrating, because they are actually narrating a kind of Mangadan Kahani, right? Like a made up insinuation and a sort of imaginary story, imaginary interpretation of events that, oh, Minu was very young and she was bursting with youthful sexuality and she was looking in the mirror. So that same heated kind of storytelling that you find in Manohar Kahania and later in television news and most recently in the Sushant Singh Rajput and Riya Chakraborty coverage, that same kind of way she's telling you the story, that's really difficult for documentary audiences because they're used to being respectable and hearing respectable things. So now they're having to listen to this kind of slightly sleazy and exciting narration. And in the middle are all these news reporters who are telling you versions of the story. And then, of course, an editing style that also mimics the broadcast news editing style at first, right? So I think in that way, maybe Morality TV is similar and different to my other work in that it is also interested in some meta kind of narratives, but it is most clearly using a meta sort of form as opposed to the other films. And I think like from Morality TV, the next film which I made, Partners in Crime, I feel that was a really different film from the other films I made. But in some ways, all the different things I'd been experimenting with just became a lot more condensed and a lot more like cooked together and not evident to see. Like what I had learned from making the other films, I think all went into shaping Partners in Crime in a more invisible sort of way. But what I think is that Morality TV and everything that I experienced, heard, did, and learned from that time really shaped the project I work on now, which is Agents of Ishq, because I understood at that time that this area of love, intimacy, which has been an interest of mine from the beginning, but it's really an area that we need to work on because between left liberal politics and right wing politics, there's no real space to talk about these things, right? They are fighting with each other, but not creating a space really for the heterogeneity that desire allows. And I think so from Morality TV onwards, I began to think a lot about this area of life, this area of politics, and what I could do in my work, which I think eventually became Agents of Ishq through a long and winding path. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. No, in all your films, one can see humor been very much part of your films, all the films. How do you look at it? I mean, like, was it planned or is it automatically comes to your mind when you design a film, when you plan a film, or it's always a kind of a critiquing from a humorous point of view, from a humor, but how do you look at it?
I mean, when people ask me if humor is planned, like, can humor be planned? I suppose yes and no is the answer. Everything in a film is planned, and yet documentary allows a lot of unplanned things to happen, right? So that's the kind of queer quality of documentary filmmaking, that you both are controlling and it is also controlling you. And that is one of the most interesting things about the documentary form, if we can abandon ourselves to it. I think, the answer to all the questions is yes, in the sense that I like humor, in not in the sense of I hate jokes. Like, I really hate it if people start telling me jokes. But I like humorousness. I like humorousness in other people. I like it in myself, and I feel that humor is an inclusive frame. I think it's also an equalizer, and humor allows the kind of humor I'm interested in, at least, is the humor which suggests that what you're seeing on screen is not the only possibility, or what you think is not the only possibility. Like, humor always allows another point of view. It suggests that there's another way of looking at something, that because it's topsy turvy, right? What humor really thrives on is like a topsy turviness. And so I think, like, a lot of political conversation is deadly solemn and serious, and it takes itself too seriously. And when you take yourself too seriously, I think it means you don't take the subject seriously enough. And I think humor sort of equalizes the way that the narrator and the people on the screen are, and it creates a more urbane relationship between the people in the film and you yourself. Because when you give space to people to be humorous in a film, because all the humor is not mine, right? You have to remember that the film may be mine, and it's tempting to think that I only have made everybody, it's tempting for me also to think that I have made everybody humorous. But the thing is, the people are humorous because I'm interested in that sort of way of talking, then they bring that to you, right? Like, people, the same people in two or three different filmmakers' films will appear different, because it's the kind of conversation we're having in the film. But the thing is that because I'm enjoying their humor, they bring their humor to the table. They want to give me something I enjoy, and I bring it to the audience that I'm cutting for because I enjoy it, frankly. I think it makes people stylish, but it also reveals to us how people imagine themselves, right? Like, when you think of style, and Morality TV is a film all about style and aesthetics in the end, but style tells you what people are thinking about themselves, how they want to be seen by the world to some extent. So I think that's important, because it filters through how the filmmaker is seeing those people. And I think it's difficult but important to look for styles which don't impose only one way of looking. So I'm not saying this is the only way you can do it. I think different filmmakers try to break down that tightness, that, oh, whatever the filmmaker says is the only truth, through different means. This is the means that I use, right? Like, allowing that performative quality of people to be in the film. So I think yes, and I think in terms of the relationship between the filmmaker and the audience, what humor does and humorousness does also make us equal, right? Like, you share a joke. That's the nice thing about a joke, right? That you share it. It's not something that you hand down to somebody else. That's why I hate it when people, like, how sometimes people tell you jokes in a formal kind of way. I don't really like stand-up comedy that much for the same reason. Because I feel it's like, now I have to laugh. It's going to be forced, which is very different from the organic nature of sharing a joke, right? So the idea of sharing a joke together also creates a togetherness between audience and filmmaker. So it removes that hierarchy that traditional liberal politics has enforced. And fundamentalist politics doesn't even pretend to have anything else. So I think that's why I like it in the films. And I think that if there's pleasure, because I think humor is just one of the elements of pleasurability in the films. Like, the music is pleasurable, the editing style is pleasurable. What everybody is doing in the film, the camera person, the sound recorders, everybody who's working on the film is bringing different layers of pleasure and engagement for the audience. And I think that you have an unreliable narrator, so you can't rely on this narrator to tell you anything, right? So you have to kind of rely on yourself. So how will you get confidence to rely on yourself when you're watching something? It means you have to be confident about your senses, and giving pleasurable work creates a feeling of comfort with your senses. It tells you that you are now in an environment where what you feel is something you may trust and have confidence in and react from. So that's really what I'm trying to construct in the films, and humor is one of the elements with which I do that. Kind of like in a Bollywood film, right, where you have the full thali of rasas, and that gives you a sense of confidence in what you're doing as a viewer.
Yes, yes. Thank you. So I think I will stop here. I can let me invite Mukul. I can ask Mukul his experience in this particular film, and also working with Paramita.
Oh God,
Mukul.
I'm scared. Okay.
Oh, well, Paro, I think you're the one. Can everyone hear me? I guess so. Yeah. Um, you're you are known to have said that you're very promiscuous in your choice of camera, where you never repeat a camera person, and I'm the only person you've worked with twice in Where Sandra and in Marathi TV. But I guess
Yeah.
it's different later now that you're doing your AOI videos and so on, where you are repeating cameramen.
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah.
I'm a
No,
relationship anarchist. I've decided.
very nice. Okay. There's also serial monogamy happening, I guess, at some
Yes.
level. Okay.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. No, it was a lovely experience. It was really a lovely experience. And apart from everything else, and I'm going to not really go too much into the gossip of it, but working with Paro is, of course, always very intense for various reasons. And it was, very nice to be in that space where you're shooting something, you are dealing forever with, the ethics of how do you represent something which is problematic. And I think some of our arguments were on that, where, you're talking about representation in general and everything else that has come with it, the dirty politics behind it, the politics of sensationalism and broadcast and news and so on. And how do we talk about it when you're shooting, when we ourselves are shooting couples in the park? And how do you do it? So it was those which actually are healthy documentary discussions, which happen which should happen among crew members. And Samina was also there. And there was Amrita who was assisting Paro on that shoot. Yes, as a cameraman, lovely shooting winters in northern India. The film opens with that lovely sequence shot in thick fog, where at least in the footage you can see something, but when you see the working stills, people think it's a wall that we're standing against, which is just thick fog. There's nothing else which is seen through that. The entire pressure of having to complete a film in 6 days or 7 days, where you just have to work very, very fast. And yes, unfortunately, I have come from that slow moving FTI school, where you take time doing things, you think about things, you look at things, and you take these lengthy takes, these lengthy retakes, and so on. So it was interesting to be able to adapt, to this. And then the edit, I believe, also was done fairly quickly, wasn't it, Paro?
Yeah. Yeah. The whole film was made in about like two months or something.
Yeah. Okay. So it was, yeah. I mean, what was problematic then itself, and I think one of the most difficult bits to shoot was the interview with the VHP guy with his shining eyes, who's saying horrible things on camera. But then when you look at it now, it almost, well, it doesn't look tame, but yeah, it looks like, okay, we've seen much worse by now. So it was prescient, it was really, really prescient what was happening at that point of time. And, we've seen what things have become now. And unfortunately, we don't seem to be getting better, which is not nice, which is really not nice. And, as you say, this is where we are right now. And truth, my God, please, let's not even talk about that word when you're talking about news, So anyway, that's a big bugbear that I have with news, and especially people who, intelligent people among us, bright people among us, people close to us in our families and friend circles, who use the news as something which they use it to reinforce their own, I guess, views that I don't agree with, and views that are clearly problematic. So yeah, that's what.
I also want to know, like, when when 2 3 people work together as a team in a film, documentary film, how do you delegate the work? Like, how do you take responsibilities? How do you share? How do you who decides what comes first? How do you share the things? I'm asking Mukul, and then
It's different with different people, really. It's really that relationship is different each time depending on who you're working with. And I mean, there are directors who leave a lot to the crew, especially the camera person in a documentary, because those roles are really overlapping, right? It's not as if I will tell you to shoot this and you will pan from here to here and then we will cut and then we take the next shot, because things are happening live and you have to think on your feet and you have to capture them as they're happening, but also be aware of the fact that this has to be edited and made into a film, so you can't wait for instruction all the time, and it's better if you're clued in. So it's different. It's really different, from person to person and the style of filmmaking. Where somebody might want an extremely, I guess, different kind of stylization, in a film which is what we would loosely call arty, where it would be different. So working with, let's say, a Farida Mehta or working with a Madhushri Datta or working with somebody else is very different. Working with Paromita is very different, you know. So you work those things out, and ultimately it's an act of collaboration, where you bring something of your own and you plug into what the director is trying to do. And I mean, since I am a director camera person myself, it's and working with others, like I work with Rohan, who's an architect. So those disciplines coming together, you really have to figure out where the overlaps are, and you figure out where you plug into it as a film person, a camera person, and what the discipline is. Like, if Paro is coming from a certain background, and Paro works a lot with text, and let's say I have only worked with text when I work with Paro, or later when I work with Rohan, whereas my approach is different. So you figure out those spaces for yourself and for the film, for the entire process to come into. So likewise for the choice of an editor or a music person and so on. And this is something that, I believe that finally working, your act of choosing your crew is an act of casting. You choose your crew according to what you want out of them and who they are, really. So is it a Naseeruddin Shah or is it an Amitabh Bachchan, just to say loosely? Or in a documentary film, is it me or any of the other cameramen, or camera persons, who you might choose to work with, depending on what they do, really. So that's what. Paro?
Okay.
I mean, I think, I agree with Mukul that the act of choosing a crew is an act of casting, and sometimes it's dependent on a lot of different things besides stylistic considerations, like who you're comfortable with, what film you're making, and whose style you think suits that, sure. But also, like, I have worked with a lot of different camera people, different sound recorders, and different editors, and I do believe that sometimes you're in some films where you are feeling more exploratory and uncertain, you may choose to work with somebody that you feel will be okay with your uncertainty, and you can work it out together. And I think these are all important considerations, right? I think, like, for me, because I know that I'm working with a style that's not necessarily orthodox, or doesn't have a long line of pre-existing examples, at least for India. I have tended to work with some kind of a written script that I can share with the team, because at least then there is something for all of us to participate in, because so much of documentary filmmaking does actually take place as you're going. You're also you're continuously, because you're engaging with actuality. So even your understanding of it is constantly being reshaped. When you're researching, when you're writing, when you're filming, when you're editing, you keep understanding the situation differently, right? So I think that having some kind of a document that you can share with your colleagues is quite one way of finding a way to explain what you're trying to do. And sometimes it becomes a basis for discussion, and sometimes it's a bit more solid, the way that Morality TV was a little bit more solid. But say earlier film like Q2P was not at all, because Q2P was really excavated as we were making the film and then made. So with Q2P, I used to just write a one-page description of the sequence, because I only knew the sequence. I didn't know the whole film when we were going out to shoot. Whereas in Morality TV, there was a larger structure already present and things were fitting into it. But I think that, also, I think that personalities of directors also determine to what extent their team members can go in and out of that process, right? So I think, like, I like working with people who have strong stylistic approaches, but who are confident enough to let your stylistic approach be. Like, sometimes I have worked with some team members who are very good at their work, but who have a desire to superimpose their stylistic understanding on yours. And I feel that that's kind of a useless activity. I always think that every film is like a dance, right? Somebody is leading that dance and somebody is following. And one should have a playful, if possible, relationship with the working that you're letting somebody lead. Like I have written films for other people. I have worked on other people's films. I don't feel a desire to impose my stylistic understanding on their work, because for me, it's actually the fun of learning somebody's style and trying to do it. And I'm released from the responsibility of, making my style come through, which is what I'm having to do in my own film and struggling with my own anxieties and difficulties and confusions and over certainties and whatever. So, but I think that, when somebody's got a strong stylistic confidence, like for example, I think Sankalp as the editor on Morality TV really brought like something extra to the film. He understood the heart of the film, and he proposed that we should do the split screen treatment because it was so much like television. And so he strengthened the threads of the film that I was trying to achieve, because I had not thought of this split screen idea, right? So there are also so many things that if your colleagues are willing to go along with the conceit of a film, right? If they are willing to say, okay, Acha, you're trying to do this, okay, let's see how we can all do it in our way, then something special can come out of it. Like they can bring their A game and they can up your game as a result, right? So really, you're looking for team members who will engage with the heart of the project, um, and who are at a place in their lives where they're willing to engage with the heart of the project. I mean, psychology has so much to do with how people end up working together, well or not, besides professionalism, besides creativity and all of that. So I think, yeah, that is how it is. And just as much as I think camera people or editors adapt to a directorial style, I think directors also adapt to the styles and personalities of their colleagues. I mean, I feel I do. And that's why also you do see that different editors and their editing styles in my films will be a little bit different. It's not like there'll always be the same editing style in the film, which is enjoined by my style. I think there's a kind of coming together that happens.
Okay, thank you. Can I invite Samina? Samina, can you share your experience with this particular film?
Well, I think as Paro and Mukul have already said, it was an extremely enjoyable shoot. It was super efficient. Like she said, we finished early. I think, I mean, in terms of sort of for us, in terms of the sound, I don't have anything in particular really to say, except that, in terms of collaboration, it really makes a difference that particularly between a camera person and a recordist, if you're able to have a kind of understanding, because often sound has to be the thing that dictates the decision, like where you place the camera and how close, all those sorts of things. So in that sense, I think that, yeah, I mean, in this crew, given that we were a small crew and we sort of knew each other, I think that was a big advantage. I do remember that there was a moment of crisis in which I think the mixer had packed up and we had one night and I was so tense and oh my God, after that I would be like, when poor Amrita, I think she drove for like through the night or something to...
Camera packed up and I drove with Amrita.
And one microphone.
Oh, and also
camera and one microphone.
Yeah. One microphone, because after that I was, I would have I'd be so tense. My entire body was tense, listening for that crackle and whatever it was. Yeah. So there was all that. I think the thing that I would like to say is that, working in a documentary crew, I think it's really important the kind of energy that there is when you're shooting. And to me, I feel that, in terms of what each crew member brings, the energy that they bring to the collaborative space, I think that's also a very big part of, how we choose and, how then that affects the film. And I think with Morality TV, this was something that actually really worked, I think, in the favor of the film. There was a very good energy. We were efficient, and like as Paro said, we still managed to have time to do all the fun stuff, and that I think is really important. It's not just, we are not like, making a film is like, I think the rest of like living a life. No, you've got to have everything happening all together, and I think that if on a shoot one is able to make room for all of that, then even when there are crisis moments like we had them, you're able to ride those out. So yeah, that's what I remember a lot of.
I think, to add to the heated discussions we had about representation, where Mukul said that I'm not comfortable. We are shooting with this long lens, these lovers, we are doing the same thing like TV cameras. And I got angry with him and I cried. And I felt that he wasn't trusting that I wouldn't use it in a salacious way or whatever. I think it's all okay. Like, I feel that a good energy allows a big fight to happen. There should be a few heated arguments. And I don't like, for me, I feel that if you're working with trust together, it shows an investment in what we are doing, right? Like when we argue about something which is to do with the film, which is not really accusatory to each other, but it is about feeling strongly about the work that you do. And I think that it helps you to think. And I think one important thing that happened and I would like to also add that, especially when you're making films about themes like Love Jihad, which has come to have a certain valence today, which maybe didn't then, but you are dealing with things that you find horrible, like police beating up young people, a deep conservatism of attitude, which was, not that we were unaware of the growing fundamentalism around us and the moral policing and other things which we did not understand maybe, or we couldn't imagine would come to be our new normal in a way. But they are, of course, very polarized issues. And when you're working with a team that is really thinking about filmmaking, and that's why I do often stress that Morality TV benefited from the fact that everybody in the team was also director. I think you don't bring such a polarized view also to the people, right? Like I think that one of the things that everybody said together, which is what made a change in the film, I feel, that around 3 or 4 days after the shoot, while we were sitting together at night and drinking, I remember somebody asked me when the film was finished, how did you guys make this film? Because it's so depressing to hear everybody say, "Ki police ne jo kiya, theek kiya." We're like, yeah, we got through it with a lot of whiskey, which was Mukul's whiskey, but we all drank it up. But the thing is that at some point we did say that, it's getting to be very difficult and oppressive, only interviewing people who are endorsing this right-wing kind of view of people should be controlled, moral policing is good, police ne jo kiya, theek kiya, etc. And the gentleman who says कि इसमें हिंदू लड़कियों की भी गलती है, and who are they talking to, and they should be policed and their cell phones should be checked, etc., etc. We decided then that we should look for some young people to talk to in the film, not necessarily involved with the incident, but some young people. And the young people at the end of the film, the two young women who say we don't have any idea of romance, were people that we found through Samina's friends. And the two young men that we found in the Archie shop, that was just a chance encounter that we met those boys and we shot with them. I do think that they changed the shape of the film, right? Like they leave the film with a certain open-endedness and a shifting of the gaze, right? The film begins with the gaze of broadcast news journalists who are trying to impose this moral polarity, and it ends with a different kind of recognition of love and how love is seen as vulgar by certain other kinds of gays, and how there's a respectability always being fought for. In the right-wing liberal conversation, it's all about respectability. But on the ground, actually, there's a heterogeneity. I don't think it's very politically correct, but there is something that is something gentler and more open about those young people at the end. And I think that was very important to the film. And I think maybe the fact that we were all together shooting helped us to think that fast on our feet, and then go out and look for something new and bring a new element into the film, which was not part of the plan.
I remember that ending, and I think it's very special because the way the film ends is these two boys, and you're talking to them about love in an Archie's shop, and the way the words that he chooses is "वो कैसी भी हो मैं रख लूँगा." However she is, I'll keep her. Look at that language. Really look at that language. In another film, you would have dissected that to death, saying what is this patriarchy, what is this, misogyny, and so on. This embodies power and so on. But you just let it be, and then it goes into a card where you pay a tribute to your father, saying dedicated to my father who never said don't. And then that lovely excerpt from, is it Lumiere, the silent film? Somewhere.
I don't know. I can't remember. Yeah, but it's a silent film. Yeah.
The kiss, the kiss keeps looping over, and my heart is beating from Judy. So you end on that note where the boy is actually talking about love in what might be seen as problematic, but that's how he is. And you end that film on that very light note, and that and that it leaves you with a layered experience at the end of everything that you've seen, and a lot of very dark things that you've seen.
I think like in the structure of the film, you start with that gaze, because you start in the park and you end in the park, right? And when you start, you're looking at it with the gaze of morality. And I think, it's very comfortable for liberals to say that right-wing people bring this gaze. But I know so many people when I was growing up who would say exactly what the young woman Gunjali says in the film. If you have to fall in love, it should not be in places like parks. This image already down ho chuki hai. So this image down ho chuki hai, which really means what? That it's sleazy, right? It's not a Bhadralok kind of love. What is a Bhadralok love? We know that. Like we talk about, I know it's very tempting to meet the conversation about love jihad by talking about interreligious marriages, right? But I think we should be very deeply conscious about how much respectability we are continuously bringing into the conversation. Whereas really love is not a respectable thing. Like love is all about desire, passion, stupidity, political incorrectness, but also a tremendously dynamic force for changing the world, right? We continuously try to domesticate it. And I think that the conversation about, love jihad versus interreligious marriage is all part of the same domesticating axis of elites who want to be respectable. Underneath that respectability, sorry?
Swasth Manoranjan.
Swasth Manoranjan, yes. Yeah. So, even this nice interfaith marriage thing is a kind of Swasth Manoranjan of liberals, right? And love jihad is to your eyes, a Swasth, but Swasth Manoranjan of right-wing thinkers. So, in a way, I just feel like the non-respectability of love and desire, anarchic nature of love and desire, which will go and scribble on a park, which will deface a monument, or you call it defacing the monument, but maybe it brings the monument alive and makes it meaningful to somebody after the people who built that monument are long gone. Yeah. Pyar means jungli billi, says Anila, and I agree with that. So the thing is that, it's slightly more inchoate and also chaotic nature of love. When seen with gentle eyes, it's all about how you look at it, right? Like there is a line from a song that I love, which says, "Badli teri nazar to nazare badal gaye." And so when you come to the end of the film's editing, rhythm, and structure changes from Priyanka's interviews. The Dalit woman who got beaten up in the park because she happened to be there and her pre-existing relationship, the woman inspector had some beef with her about something else, and she used that moment to attack her. And so Priyanka got drawn into the story, right? So actually, you also understand that every story actually has long tails of many other stories, and no incident is ever about only one thing, especially in India, right? There are elements of caste, there are elements of religion, there's elements of the economy, there's anxiety about controlling gender, there's a deep-seated need to control women, of course, but to control young people from transgressive love, from same-sex love, from intercaste love, and from interfaith love as well, right? It's not that love jihad is only about Hindu-Muslim love. It is actually it is one more factor in many factors, which is very anxious about social change and about people making their own choice. So I think that this gentleness of the young people, even the people who are saying, I have no idea of romance, but they are giggling and blushing. So you know that they are thinking about romance. But we don't really need them to articulate. See, I would make this difference, that there's a way that you have to articulate that, I don't care if the police come in. I have nothing to hide. I have been in a hotel room with my lover. I will marry somebody who's not of my faith. These declarations, they are sanitizing, right? But the right to not declare what you're feeling should also be a right. So in the film, though, of course, I did push in the interview and eventually the young women did say what their idea of romance was, but we didn't put it in the film because there's something more powerful about seeing that they're keeping their idea of romance to themselves, I feel. And at the same time, Shokeen, the second boy in the card shop, says a fantastic and excessively wise thing. प्यार तो किसी से भी हो सकता, कैसे भी हो सकता है, देखे या अनदेखे का, it's got nothing to do with seeing or not seeing somebody. Love can just happen to anybody. So I think actually the film starts loosening its gaze and becoming more open. So I know it seems an impossible thing to think right now when we see that love jihad is going to become law. But I still feel that if we bring a different gaze to the moment, we will see some other things and we can put our work and our energy behind those other things instead of constantly fixating on what the right wing is saying and then just countering that with the inside out version of it, right? Which I think is a very useless politics because it traps us in that paradigm. It doesn't allow us to leave that paradigm. And I often think of Morality TV as being that the film slowly tells you can leave this paradigm. You can leave. You don't have to be in that tight gaze all the time. You can go somewhere to the margin. If you're willing to go to the margins, you can come to a freer space. I think there is a reflection. For me, Morality TV was actually a reflection on the idea of the expose, sting operations, liberal storytelling, and documentary film moralities, right? That's what I was thinking when I made the film. I was not really so interested in only the right wing, but really in how sometimes right wing discourse and liberal discourse are kind of the same. And we need to think about how we tell the stories that we tell. Shokeen will do well with COVID PR, says somebody. And yes, Shokeen is ahead of the curve.
At first, his name was Shokeen.
Shokeen, I'll never forget his name because it was Shokeen.
Okay. Okay. So let me invite the audience members to give their questions or comments. So we, as I told in the beginning, since we are a very small group, let me take the liberty of inviting everybody one by one. Don't mind if I call your name and ask you.
Just like school.
Yeah, kind of. I think Subhasri came the first. Can I invite Subhasri?
I would rather others speak first. I'm happy to listen. So when I have something to add, I'll.
So, Vashi, show your face.
No.
Yeah, I know all these vain people who are not showing their face.
I'm happy to listen to others. Thank you, Amudan.
Thank you.
I just want to also say I've been really enjoying listening to you all. So that sounds very PC, but I mean it. Yeah.
Okay.
We allow a little bit PC.
Yeah. Okay. Can I invite Ramnanda?
Yes, sir. Hi. Hello.
Yes. Go ahead.
Nothing particular to say in general, but what I felt is this documentary, which was shot almost a decade back, is still relevant for the present day because of BJP or maybe because of RSS or ABVP or VHP, all these units of the Hindutva ideology, which they are trying to force upon not in general for a particular community, but the entire country by bringing out new laws like love jihad, which is currently uh, most probably very soon is going to be implemented in Karnataka and Uttar Pradesh, which I read in news, and also laws regarding cow slaughter. Considering all these factors, your documentary is still very relevant. Maybe it will be relevant even after 10 years from now, because condition, I don't think this condition is going to change very soon. That is one thing I felt about the documentary, which made this documentary fresh even today. And like you said, you took three perspectives: one, a person in the park, a police person, and then a reporter. Again, in your documentary, there is a local news channel where he takes two bites, one from the uh, a person in the park, and other from the
He says, no, I take of the criminal and the police. These are the two perspectives I take. The wrongdoer and the right doer. That's how he sees it.
Yeah. I like in the starting when you said I took perspectives from three
no, I
different
didn't
people.
take perspectives from three people. I thought I would, but eventually the film has many people's perspectives.
Okay. And one thing I particularly didn't understand is the story of Meena is a fictional. Is the Meena is a fictional character, right?
What do you think?
I thought it is Meena a fictional character, and the story which are whatever is happening in the documentary can also happen to Meena. That is what I felt.
So Meenu is a fictional character, but if you connect how Meenu is spoken about, and that's why I want to say that maybe it's not just about love jihad, but we should think in a broader frame. And you think about how Riya Chakrabarti was spoken about in the recent news coverage, you can see the commonality, right? You can see that it's the same way of talking about somebody. If you look at Riya Chakrabarti's story from one point of view, a young woman falls in love with somebody who's grappling with addiction and depression issues. And he dies by suicide, and she gets spun into some kind of a morality tale where she becomes the symbol of all things that are wrong because she does not conform to certain norms of what a good woman should be, right? There's no difference between the way she was spoken about and the way Meenu's story is told. So yes, I mean, you're right. I think that Meenu is just a girl, like the girls in the film, or any other women anywhere else living their lives, wanting to experience youth, desire, and life. And there is a certain way of telling her story that we are hearing, which is fictionalized.
Yeah. There is a certain tension and the danger associated with her life. That is what I felt
Yeah.
watching the documentary.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it, ma'am. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ramananda.
I want to make one quick response though to
Yes,
what you
yes,
said about
please.
relevance. Like I wanted to suggest that people, if they're interested, should look at the work of a historian called Charu Gupta. And Charu Gupta talks about what happens in the 19th century in relationship to ideas of moral policing, and how there's a very huge kind of push to create a narrative of good Hindu women and dominant Hindu men who are fighting depraved forces, right? So it hinges around a lot of print magazines and novels that come out at that time, which have names like Chocolate, which is about same-sex love between men mostly, and interfaith love, intercaste relationships and elopements, and also a lot of literature that starts emerging at that time, popular literature, which is about Bhabi Deva relationships, elopements, and so on and so forth. And to look at it in a in a different way, these things will always be relevant because people are responding to economic change, to historical shifts, to social shifts. And earlier, when we listened to gossip, we always listened to it only in film magazines, right? So then it seemed like an exception. Only these very unusual people who work in films, or very rich people, they lead this kind of a racy life, and then we can consume it as outsiders. But then when popular narratives start emerging, like when print culture comes and many cheap novels, because print culture makes it cheaper to produce books and magazines, right? And then suddenly you see that there's a lot of people in everyday middle class life and working class life who are actually having very different intimate lives than what is produced as the norm. It creates an upheaval, and a big language of moral policing starts to emerge. And some of that moral policing is emerging because there's a lot of Indian anxiety about the British presenting Indian men as effeminate. And they want to show we are not effeminate, we can control our women, right? So actually, if you read Charu Gupta's work, what you see is that these kinds of incidents occur again and again in history, where controlling our women becomes an axis on which everything that is seen as a transgression of this idealized life of good Hindus or upstanding aristocratic Muslims or ruling communities, basically, uh, they use these things as a way to make certain men or certain castes and communities dominant in the society, while while saying that no, we don't have all this transgressive love. And what also happened in the 19th century is that there were many formations of Hindu community groups which banded with, for example, men of other castes, of lower castes, saying that, look, Muslims are taking away your women, right? So you also, where there is actually a caste oppression, you start papering over that oppression and saying, we are the same because Muslim is our common enemy and he'll take away our women. So you also see how this kind of dominant patriarchal but also religious and caste narrative is established using the example of women. So if you go from then to the current time, you go to the time that Morality TV is made 15 years ago, and you see the exact same patterns are taking place. Broadcast is making news cheaply possible, and in cheaply possible news, these stories, which are like, oh, these are bad women. Shakti Kapoor, he's a horrible man. Let's do a sting operation on him. Let's do sting operations on all women who are not having conventional lives. So it's a way of telling you that if you're not having a conventional life, you don't fit into the dominant narrative. And our women are under threat from these kinds of outside women. Like it may have been courtesans in one kind at one time, it will be single women at another time. In today's time, we saw it with the Riya Chakrabarti story, but we see it with many stories and right-wing trolling. But we must remember that it's happening at a time when something like TikTok and the internet itself is revealing that the dominant narrative is not the real narrative of life. The real narrative of life is people falling in love with each other. Is people marrying across faith and caste? Is a lot of people deciding not to marry at all? So I would just say that, to answer Aditi Mitchell's question, if the inversion of the right-wing narrative, if not that inversion, then what would be the way to deal with it? And I do think that if we fixate on the right-wing narrative, then we have no choice but to present the inside-out version of that narrative. If we fixate on the idea that, oh, gay love is bad, then what happens is we just say, love is love, and now we'll have gay marriage. So where will that leave, say, trans people? Where will that leave people who don't want to marry but live together for a long time? Where will that leave people who are thruples? Where will that leave polyamorous? Where will that leave so many different things, right? So I think that really these kinds of incidents give us a moment to rethink our political frame. I know it sounds like a little too comfy, like, hello, love jihad is going to be law. So I would like to ask the even more radical question, is law the final arbiter of life? And do we want to give law so much importance and not give importance to other aspects of life? Because then it's always a fight between law and tradition and we got nowhere else to go. So in answer to Aditi's question and also to the commentary about relevance, I would say that I really think it's important for those of us who work with the world of art and ideas to continuously imagine third, fourth, fifth, and sixth spaces and strengthen those spaces, which is what I think I would like to do in Agents of Ishq, and what I see many of my colleagues trying to do in their different ways, right? Not to make it a binary argument, but to make it relationship anarchy of ideas somewhere. Sorry, it was not my turn, but yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, ma'am, since you have seen a lot and since you have worked on this field a lot, suppose if a person is being morally policed either by the police or the right-wing groups, how do you think a person should stand for themselves and defend themselves?
I don't think there's a should. I mean, I think we all try to defend ourselves the best we can. Sometimes we have people who are in solidarity with us. Sometimes we don't. So I think there is no should. And there is no one answer. People always survive by a number of mixed strategies.
But sometimes this situation goes from verbal to physical, being physically manhandled.
Yeah.
That definitely is a problem.
Of course, it's a problem. Nobody's saying it's not a problem. But after we've said that it's a problem, it's not so simple to say the solution is what? You don't know. I don't know, right? So that means although by law, the police are not supposed to beat up that person, they are still doing it. Censorship is another example. Many people in documentary films argue with each other on the process of censorship. Some people believe you should get a censor certificate. Some people don't want a censor certificate. Now, the thing is, you can get a censor certificate. That is the law of the land. But that will not protect you from goons who come and attack your screening, right? So I think that's why I'm saying that when we think in binaries, we are unable to think of third and fourth and fifth ways of existing. Then we keep giving more and more power to only right-wing, to state, to community groups. We don't take that power away for ourselves and create diverse, heterogeneous spaces for coexistence. And we don't give more power to different domains, right? So as long as Bollywood was a chaotic, politically incorrect, but a space where many different people could enter and watch, it had a power of its own. Today, when we have sanitized Bollywood and we want it to be realistic and we want it to be on Netflix and we want it to be in a certain corporatized space and meeting certain liberal, respectable ideas of what is a good film, politically correct film, Bollywood has been shorn of all its power. Therefore, today it is much easier for all the power to be only in the political domain, and therefore we have the binary of trolls and liberals and whatever. We're not allowing heterogeneity of spaces to coexist, right? So then it becomes very difficult to have social movement forward. I don't mean social movements, but a movement forward. Like we'd all the time be playing this ping pong. That's what will happen. It will be this person, that will be that person. So it'll be like a game of cricket, but instead maybe that's not how it should. Maybe it should be more like a playground.
Okay, thank you, Ramnanda.
Just,
Anila wanted to say something.
Yeah. नहीं, I just wanted to add to what Paramita said. Remember वो था ना कि उसी को देख के जीते हैं जिस काफिर पे दम निकले. So you can't blame the state for all of the problems that you have and then expect and turn to them अब आप solve करें, right? You do that with parents, but like you're in spite of them or spiting them half of the time. I really feel like I keep on saying we should embrace the gray areas, as Paro says, right? Laila bhi to bahut piti thi, हाँ, Majnu bhi bahut pita tha. It didn't end there, right? That is going to be part of it. Like, I'm just going to put that down, right? Okay, Paro, you've said that you don't believe in being a serial monogamy, right? That you like disruption and एक बार मतलब आप पीछे मुड़ के नहीं देखते हो ना, because you might turn into stone if you use the same camera person, if you use you don't return to the site.
In between you should have somebody else. Yes.
Yeah, I know.
Palette cleanser.
Palette cleanser, yes. But you've never, it has been now 13 years
Since
right?
this film? Yeah, 14 years.
2007, right?
Yeah.
And like I'm trying to remember, because I think it's been 13 years since I watched it. There was something about your Prabhu ki dhen hai, right? It was very beautifully, they had explained what love is. Ke Paramatma ki,
Julie and the Professor.
They were
Paramatma ka prasad hai.
Paramatma, uska prasad. I just love that. Yeah. You've never thought of revisiting, and you know how you have it where they all are right now. Because though you've given me one ke wo jo they, you know, after a week of running away, unka pe to shaadi karna pada. Then there was this young woman who had taken on the police officer, and the lawyer who had said ke main to insaf dilaunga. Like I know, okay, maybe it is just us that you really want to know, okay, you know, the end fir kya hua, closure kya hua. Do you ever want to visit Meerut? Because Meerut.
Actually, after making this film, while editing this film, I had this thought that I would write a book about love. And in that, I had wanted to go and revisit both Julie and the Professor and the two who got married, unko shaadi karni padi, and find out. So yes, I did have that thought that I will do it, but the problem of promiscuity is that I, of course, got distracted by other things, and I didn't do that project, and I did other things instead. But I do still wonder about these two stories that you bring up. Now, Julie and the Professor, I want to tell you an interesting thing, that they actually ended up on the front page of the Mumbai Mirror some years later, because they came to Bombay to stand against the Valentine's Day persecution by the Shiv Sena.
Oh, lovely.
They gave roses to people. And I also found out that the professor, in fact, had to leave his teaching position because he used to do this kind of preaching about love politics to his students. And that was considered to be a bit too subversive. And he also edited of a Hindi literary magazine, maybe Hans, the Prem Visheshank, of which I do have a copy actually. So I think like someday, Julie and the Professor,
Fantastic.
the very fact that her name was Julie, and of course the film ends with a song from Julie, always makes me feel happy. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And I just want to say that, of course, Julie and the Professor were also part of television news as much as Operation Majnu, right? So I think it's a far messier thing and has both elements of oppression and depression and elements of tremendous liberation and subversion going on at the same time. And I feel for us to engage with that moment, I don't know that any of us have the strength or possibility of coming up with one solution. I don't think so. I think we are just people like everybody else. And we try to engage with the moment. So in order to engage with the moment, if we see it in a broad frame, we can find a place for engagement. But if we see it in a narrow frame, then I think we get stuck in a tug of war rather than finding a space that will make more opening, to also address what Ram said earlier.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you, Anila.
Thank you.
Hansa.
Yes, sorry?
Hansa.
Can I? Yes. Hansa? Okay, Hansa. Hi, hello.
Hi.
Go
Can
ahead.
I ask? Yeah.
Yes, please.
No, just because it's coming from what is being said, it occurred to me when I was seeing the film that you were a younger filmmaker at that time. It struck me that there's a sense of entitlement to lead off from what Anila is saying, which actually is a trap. When you feel entitled to understand what is right and wrong, your narrative doesn't go very far. बहुत ही जल्दी you find देखो मिल गया वो शिवसेना का आदमी जिसने फला बोल दिया, and so your blacks and whites are settled because you feel entitled to sort of stand up for the right. It's your job. I mean, you almost become that man actually who is supposed to protect his family, and that is a trap for the man, as we all know. So yeah, I mean, I think the thing that struck me when I saw the film again is, of course, in the visualizing, in the scripting, in the sound, is this very like jilmil quality, just keeps moving. Yeah, and at the same time, you keep finding multiple narratives on the ground. So if there is difficulty with the popular at the level of TV news, there's also the Damini narrative, right? This woman who finds the lawyer who's standing up with her. She wants justice at all costs, and there is this really real life version of Sunny Deol जो वो करने को तैयार है. So I think that sometimes as filmmakers we don't entitle ourselves to think that we're just human beings. We think that we are subjects of the state. We are like, we are these. I don't want to say masculine, but yeah, we are. हमको इस देश की रक्षा करनी है. In short, the narrative becomes that, and a lot of documentary making perhaps proceeds from that point, but is not able to go beyond that point. And therefore, I mean, I don't even think this is a question. But what did stump me when we were talking earlier is that you talked about having a script, and I thought, Jesus, in this film, if you had the script, I mean, the film actually has a very tight bones, which are of a novel, like of multiple characters, layers, and one method that I can think of is that all the signifiers are loosened slightly. I'd say even the VHP guy, of course, the image shows this quiet, soft-spoken man, and you're already thinking, what is happening here? Yeah, because there's such utter sincerity with which he says that bit that he says. But I mean, Julie, who's of course playing and also sincere, turns that whole religious thing also on its head within the film. So, I mean, when you were looking for the structure, I mean, I'm really interested in the scripting actually now. So, how did you diversify and how did you pull together that edit that you did before you set out on the shoot?
So, I think I mean, I can't give a very clear answer because, when I say there's a script, I feel always that the script is always a kind of skeleton and it's a suggestion and it's a kind of like a knitting pattern that is given to you, which you can freely diverge from on the ground, right? Because you may set out to make a sweater, but you might end up with a muffler. It can happen. Mostly that would happen to me, that sweater is too difficult, let's make the muffler. No, but the thing is that, but the opposite happens in a film. I think you set out to make a muffler and you almost always end up with some kind of multicolored, magical coat, because life itself, that's why I'm saying that the space of making the film, I feel the script gives you a kind of humble position. But I'm out to do justice. It constrains you. Therefore, it gives more play and space to the people who are in the film to change the course of that thing. And for you, not to feel insecure, but to feel grounded and be open to that changing moment, right? And so I think that's what works for me. And like I said, it's different for different filmmakers. This is what works for me. But I think there's a larger question in the edit. And I'll tell a small story about the edit, okay? Which is that the man at the end, who's editor of Dainik Jagran, he says, कि आजकल जो है ना, bluism का ज़माना. And I remember when we were interviewing him, it was very late at night. We were a bit tired and it was cold. And he was there in a suit, which we didn't expect because we had met him in a very different way before. I had met him in a different look before. And he had these huge archives of newspapers, which he's turning around and showing us. And then he suddenly said, this bluism ka zamana. And I remember feeling like, bluism ka zamana? Like the excitement of a new slang, which is always fun to discover, right? And of course, another thing that is not in the film was when we interviewed Ved Prakash, the novelist, right? I remember Mukul saying, because I very effortlessly asked, it was the last day of the shoot or something, and I effortlessly spoke in Hindi, and Pitravad and Brahmanvad and all were tripping off my tongue. But on the first day of the shoot, I was still struggling a little bit with Hindi, right? And Mukul said, "Arey, Paromita badi Hindi seekh gayi hai." But in that shoot, actually, Ved Prakash's son was sitting next to him. He's not finally edited into the film. And the thing is, whenever we asked him any question, he would say, "My daddy se agree hu," which we didn't put in the film, but it shaped something about the way we edited Ved Prakash's sequence, right? It softened even the way we looked at everybody, because we saw other things, and then because we had seen those intimacies, we had shared those intimacies with those people, so it changed the way that we looked at it. And I feel that everybody does have a certain wisdom from their life, right? Everybody doesn't have to be politically correct. So I feel everybody in the film does say one or two lines, even the most, like, people whom I totally disagree with. Like, in fact, Ved Prakash says what to me is a great line, and I think it's the thesis line for all my own work, कि बिकता है तो पल्प है. अब लोग कहते हैं पल्प है इसलिए बिकता है, और मैं कहता हूँ कि बिकता है इसलिए पल्प है. So this inversion which he does, and I think it's so important. And we also came to know certain things about them, like Ved Prakash reads a lot. He loves books. He writes pulp fiction. Doesn't mean that he doesn't have an understanding of the world, right? So I think that when you encounter that in people and you're willing to see people as much as possible with a certain, I would say again, it's an urbane intimacy, right? Like you have met them, you're having a conversation. I was not trying to expose them. So that helps me to see some other thing. The thing I remember most about Sandeep Pahel from the VHP was that we were like, should we tell him Samina's name is Samina? Should we pretend it is Meena, right? Because she's Muslim, and then what? Anyway, we didn't. We said Samina, whatever, but we said fast. Sandeep Pahel, when we went to shoot with him, said, "Aap aiye, we have made sarson ka saag and makki ki roti, and you must eat it." And our discomfort, that should we eat it? We disagree with him. Should we be partaking of his hospitality or not? So we didn't eat the sarson ka saag, but when we went there, he brought out tea for everybody in their best china. And I feel there's such a niceness about that, you know, and that certain hospitality. Now, when you've seen this in people, I think it's pretty difficult to cut them in as out and out villains. I don't know how people find it so comfortable. And maybe the fact that I am less monumentalist in my way of shooting allows that moment that you end up seeing somebody, like you go to interview them in their house or whatever. So that absurdity, ऐसी बहुत सारी चीजें हैं जिसका आपके पास सबूत नहीं है, पर आप जानते हैं. Right? He says that this is both ridiculous and not ridiculous, right? Because it's mirrored by Shauqeen saying at the end of the film, प्यार तो देखे के साथ भी हो सकता है, अनदेखे के साथ भी हो सकता है. That's not different than what Sandeep Pahel is saying, right? So actually people themselves utter many wisdoms, and I'm not underlining it in the film as wisdom, but it's retained, so it enters you, right? But even the story about the bluism is such that also it was very, very cloudy in Meerut when we were shooting, and we shot these very dark, and one day it was very overcast and everything looks blue when we were filming, right? We were filming in the cycle rickshaw in the old city. And when we were editing that sequence, I thought to myself that I really want to put Aajkal bluism ka zamana hai overlapping on this blue shot of the exterior. But I was feeling a little shy to say it to Sankalp, because I thought he'll laugh at me. But anyway, it so happened that day I was very sleepy, and I said, "Can I take a nap?" And Sankalp said, "Sleep." And I said, "Wake me up before you edit the next interview." But Sankalp didn't wake me up. I woke up, I heard the interview, I ran out, and I saw that Sankalp had overlapped the line, "Aajkal jo hai bluism ka zamana hai," on the blue sky shot. So I said, "Sankalp, how did you do this?" He said, "Isliye to tumne shoot kiya na." So I was like, oh my God, he completely gets the idea of the film, right? Actually, I'm not saying this to point out how Sankalp understood what my cheap desires. I'm saying that the importance of cheap desires. Giving cheap desires importance in a film is very important to me. All the things that people don't consider important are important to me, because I feel something important is there, right? Bluism ka zamana somehow makes us, it de-villainizes the person who's saying ki wo ladkiyon ki bhi galti hai. Which part should I take seriously? The bluism part, or that he wants to actually police his daughter's mobile phones? Both parts are real, right? So I have to make a decision on my own terms. I am not easily given a decision. And I think that's very important for each of us. It humanizes us. To humanize ourselves, we need to humanize other people. It's not the other way around, actually. You know. So then we feel it is more possible and also less possible to do things, I suppose. But that is life, and I think it's okay. So in terms of editing, I think I do work a lot with this kind of what is considered flotsam and jetsam. And there is a certain sansani quality to what I want to make, a glittering quality, because I feel other people don't think it's important. But I think that's how the unseen thing becomes visible to us. The unspoken thing becomes visible to us, right? So it is made from that.
Yeah, so if I may say so, therefore, like I want dipstick because it's your session. And there'll be many of us who'll feel like, this is Paro ka session hai. You know, me.
Except Samina who has come with oil in her hair.
Yeah, and so, yeah, maybe the lips become visible. Good.
Yeah.
But then Samina put on the flower.
Yeah, but you know, by the same token, sometimes there have been arguments with people, right? Like, so for example, I remember a very big argument with Jabin when we were editing Q2P, because I took a shot of the man who is the curator of the Toilets Museum eating an apple while sitting on top of a commode. Now, of course, it's very tempting to say that, oh, it's a reference to the discreet charm of the bourgeoisie, which it is. But it also is that when we were doing the research, I saw him sitting on top of the commode eating his lunch from a thali, and I was like, automatically it is discreet charm of the bourgeoisie. Now I must replay that moment in the film. Okay. And Jabin kept saying it is not needed. And I'm like, it's very necessary. And she's like, why is it necessary? And I'm like, because it's funny. And when you open with that shot, welcome to the Toilets Museum, he eats an apple, right? It just forces you not to have expectations, because it's like nothing you expected, right? So when it's nothing that you expected, maybe you let go your preconceptions just for a few minutes and make yourself see something afresh, right? And it's the same thing that also in Unlimited Girls, because the film starts with saying, when I don't know what I'm looking for, I look for, well, okay, love, right? You are not expecting a film on feminism to start that way. So it allows you to set your preconceptions aside for a minute, I feel. Yeah. And that's the same way that I did not expect right-wing people to be nice people when I started making films, right? And I found that they were always nice, and most left liberals whose politics I agreed with were always very badly behaved. And this was so like a very seminal, formative thing for me, right? It changed the way I thought about politics because of the people that I was encountering. So I guess,
yeah, I mean, sorry, I think it's also that riddle of that man who's so pleasant, even though we don't see him giving you guys tea, but you know that, yeah. And of course, also having lived in North India, and perhaps Mukul also might feel that you know it, and it bugs you also, because you just know it too well कि अब आप चाय भी अच्छे से पिला देंगे और you know बाद में कुछ भी you know
जिहाद भी बोल देंगे
but still I mean, as an image it sort of leaves you with a riddle, and I think that's a good thing in a way, because it's a riddle you have to solve. I mean, and I mean, it's a riddle we have to solve right now, I mean, in our country also. So that image is a riddle.
I want to just
we can't just
say that in that solving of that riddle, you know, this thing of the binary that Paro has been constantly emphasizing, I think that's really important, because in the solving of that riddle, all that we are being shown is the sort of happy interfaith marriages. But that's only one part of it.
I think there is no unhappy interfaith marriage.
Yeah, exactly. That too. And also the fact that, you know, like a lot of this kind of thing came out that, you know, this is against art, like the tradition. But, you know, the fact is that objecting to interfaith marriages is also part of our tradition. No, we have had that. And, you know, like from all kinds of quarters, not just the right wing, from liberal progressive types of families also, you know, that kind of different kinds of objections are there. But all those get elided then.
Thank you very much. So can I invite Vijay Shanti?
Hi, sir. Good afternoon, ma'am. I mean, as much as I enjoyed the film, I'm enjoying the conversations and wide range of things that you're, sharing with us here. I don't know if it's a right term to use, but when I was watching your film, so after watching Morality TV, I watched Where's Sandra, because I wanted to watch your other films, and thankfully it was available on YouTube. I loved that film too, as much as I love this one.
Also shot by Mukul.
I felt like it's like a peppy number. That's how I enjoyed your film. You know, documentary was moving in a peppy way. That's the style I think you found for yourself. I think you have spoken about your style already. My question is two things, ma'am. One, your films are like 35 minutes, 18 minutes, but you're trying to capture so much. And my question is, how do you do that? Do you already frame a duration in mind and go ahead? Because within that 18 minutes, wide range of things happen in terms of frames, in terms of visuals, in terms of dialogues, and the narrator conveying something. And the other one is about the choice of language that you make in your films. After watching Where's Sandra, I also watched Cosmopolis, Two Tales of a City. 3 films, narrator and primarily narrator uses different kind of languages. What I mean is English is also different. You're going back and forth with playing with English. and then you're using Hindi in this film. How do you decide what language you should sort of fix on for the narrator? These are two questions that I'm, curious about. And then talking about love romance, you already mentioned Agents of Ishq evolved, but I started following your Agents of Ishq first and then watched your film. Both had that element of not taking positions, keeping space open for young boys and girls and other spectrums to take positions of whatever they want to take. One might disagree with those positions, but these voices are there, and I think that was really beautiful. And one for one thing, I want to thank you is I'm at this juncture where I'm confused about um, both right, left, and all the in betweenness. What is right and what is not right? What is politically correct, or is political correctness sufficient in that sense for us to mold or understand human behaviors? And a constant fear is that even the left would not agree if you critique them, and if you say
left
that
doesn't agree with anybody. Yes, they will not agree if you critique them.
yeah, so I think when you share this, it's all in a platform where there are unknown people. I think that's giving us a confidence to also feel that you're not wrong in thinking so. Thank you so much for that.
No, thank you for your comment. About the answer to language, I think like mostly I do tend to work in English, but in Indianized English, and I think that each subject does dictate its language in that sense. In Morality TV, if we had used English, there is an available language of English pulp fiction. We could have used it, of course, but I think that would have then become a condescension to the space, right? The Manohar Kahaniya and the news language was very natural to that space, so we did it in Hindi for that reason. Yeah. And about this idea of coexisting with disagreement, I think, to add to what Samina said, that counter to love jihad, we are always being shown these happy interfaith marriages as if there is no unhappy interfaith marriage, right? So I feel what's the counter really is the counter, it's like, where do you see? I don't see a very big difference between the idea of one absolute and another absolute, right? So then I would say that the counter to those who speak in absolutes is to create some kind of a language or space where you are willing to sit with disagreement. I am willing to sit in a space with somebody I don't agree with. And isn't that the nature of all relationships that we have? I have friendships for 30, 35 years. My friends and I don't always agree on everything, and we have had bitter fights and felt criticized by each other, much like a small fight that we've had during the making of the film. But we can live with that disagreement because it's not the only thing that is in our relationship, right? So I feel it's the same with everything that I feel that we have to create forms in which disagreements can coexist, in the sense that we exist in an overlapping fashion. We don't exist in clean, neatly categorized boxes like we are in the army. It's not an this anthropological sorting out of people, this taxonomizing of life. It comes from a very colonialized perspective, which is then played out both in liberal kinds of languages as well as right-wing languages. On the other hand, the heterogeneity of life, where of course you coexist with families with whom you've had bitter disagreements. There are queer people whose families have horribly oppressed them and othered them and been mean to them, who are looking after their ailing parents right now, right? All of that happens. It is life. I cannot agree with somebody who says that it's not life because it doesn't fit into a neat box. So the idea that we are all works in progress, we have a belief system, I have a position on things, but I am not defined like it's not all one thing, we're all many things. I think so the search for inclusive frames is how I would say it simply. How can we create more and more types of frames which are inclusive and which allow a diversity of perspectives to come for some time and maybe to go away and be somewhere else, which is why relationship anarchy and promiscuity, which I keep talking about, are part of also the way of living of people, right? And how do we accommodate for that in our work?
Ma'am, just one more question. So you would be watching many documentaries. So are there like okay, all right. If you do, I mean, like if you've been doing that, which documentary filmmakers have you been following in terms of their style, or whose style has influenced you? If there has been some influences or inspirations that you've taken from.
Actually, I don't think I've been influenced directly by anyone. I mean, there are many, many different things that I've loved and taken from. And as you can already see that I really love aspects of popular cinema. It's not that I love all of popular cinema either, but I love songs and I love certain kinds of performance, like slightly slightly camp elements like mythological films and all of that. So I have used them in my films. But I also like, I love Jean Rouch, and I love SNS Shastri, and I love some of Agnes, like quite a lot of Agnes Varda's work. And I also love John Akomfrah, who is a filmmaker from the UK of Caribbean origin, I think. And I love Wiseman also, shockingly, though you'll see no elements of his work in my film. So I love many, many filmmakers. Unfortunately, I'm very promiscuous in the people I love also. And, it's not always that you take the style of somebody you love and put it in your films. But when you see things that you love, you create a conversation with that in your mind, right? And it also makes you who you are. So I think that all of these filmmakers, I love them, and somewhere they make me who I am, and so maybe then I make the films. But I think like I'm not very good at remembering lists of things, so I'm sure there are at least 12 names I've left out. Maybe it's more than filmmakers, it's individual films that I've often loved of other people's. And like, I love Kamla Bai, I love I Am 20, I love Madhushi Datta's film Memories of Fear. I really loved it when I was young, and I saw it and I thought, like, what a wonderful way to tell about how we internalize violence, right? So, I mean, from Indian filmmakers, there are many. And I remember when I saw Bombay City as a young person, how profoundly it affected me. Even if I may critique some elements of that kind of style today, but it affected me a lot. I remember seeing something like A War by Deepa Dhanrajan being very impacted by it at that time. So I think you may also later critique some things which you saw, and then still be shaped by the moment of seeing them at that time. Right? Even if you were shaped by disagreeing with it in your work later, which I think I have done with some films which I found impactful as a young person. Yeah. There are some films which I feel really impacted me, and I don't remember the names of some of those filmmakers. I've only seen the film once. Like, I saw a film called Boatman by a director called Gianfranco Rossi at the Bombay Documentary Festival. It was such a funny film. And it was about Banaras, and it was one of those films which both talked about the meaningfulness of Banaras to Indian life, but also made fun of the exoticizing of Banaras by foreigners who keep coming. So I thought that was quite a remarkable film. My friend Ruchir Joshi, whom I worked with, I won't say that I'm impacted by his films, but I enjoyed working with him and learning to see how he makes films. So that's my not at all useful answer to your question. But yeah, but
it was really useful. It was really. I'm making note of these names and titles. Yeah, thank you.
I think I also mostly, the strongest influence on my work is Hindi film songs. I have to admit that I think Hindi film songs really shape my thinking and shape my style. And I try to, if there's anything at all that I try to emulate, it's actually the structure of Hindi film songs and the many things that happen inside film songs, and trying to find a film or writing equivalent of that. And to some extent also poetry, which I love a lot.
Actually, my personal experience, Paro, is that the older we get and the more work we do, it gets harder and harder to answer that question.
Yeah.
And so on, because there are way too many. And like you said, it's different aspects of different filmmakers or individual films and so many other things that, inform your work and influence your work. So I kind of get a minor panic attack if somebody asks me.
I also do with a small group, so I'm feeling nobody will judge me too much. Like, for example, I would say I'm very strongly affected by and impacted and shaped by the film Khoobsurat, Hrishikesh Mukherjee's film with Rekha.
I love it.
I love that movie in every which way, and I can talk about it for 2 hours, but I'll tell you a simple way in which what is in the film is also there in Morality TV, and it is that bluism ka zamana, right? So in Khoobsurat, they have this thing ki kafiya milao. They keep talking in rhyme. And it's such a nice way of interacting with each other. And in a way, that visual pun, no, the blue sky and the bluism ka zamana, it also is a kind of learning from that way of making films. Hello, Amit. I'm glad you like the film. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Can I invite? Just hold on, sorry.
I'm shifting because my battery is finishing.
So, can I invite Pratima Rohini?
Oh, hi, everybody. So it was wonderful watching your film. So everything you said about heterogeneity of spaces and like all narratives and everything, like I I could see that in your film. And so I love the fact that it's like very sensitively portrayed. I mean, like each story is unique, and yet, you know, like there's a thread that connects all these stories. So it was so beautiful. And so like, was there like, were there two things going on? Like, were you trying to like focus on love as, you know, like as all these different people define, like as something pure and something, you know, unattainable or something to strive for and all that, and then there's desire that you sort of do not act on, and like there are spaces where you just don't act on, and also people that get beaten up, or and also like who gets to act on their desire and where, and like who are these moral police. So like those things, like I felt like there were two different things going on at the same time. You know, like the tenderness of love, like where you know, the man at the very end, like he talks about his love for this woman that he hasn't even met, and like he still has these feelings for her. So it's something, like you pointed out, it's something yeah, so it's something very personal, and yeah, so like there are problematic statements that he makes, and like as Mukul said, but then again, like beyond all that, there's something about love and desire and acting on desire. So like, did that come up, like in
the time of filming?
In the time of filming, like who gets to act on their desire? And
I think that is a kind of current that's running under the film in a way. And, you know, we could also, there was somebody who watched the film who got very agitated on seeing the cops beating up the lovers and said that, oh, they're just frustrated because they can't have the desire, so they're beating up the people who can't. And, you know, on the one hand, one feels quick to dismiss that. But on the other hand, I feel there's something there, right? Like when we live in a world where we are not supposed to live out desire, it creates anxiety to watch desire being lived out, right? So I think that desire is a very important part of life. And I think each of us has the capacity to both act on and to also be judgmental of other people's desires. We all see that in ourselves. So I guess that was there as an undercurrent in the film. But more than that, I would say that working on the film led to a greater understanding of this, which has evolved for me over time.
Amit has asked some question. Paramita? Amit has texted something. Did he?
But just a comment.
Okay. Sure. Okay. Can I invite Killy?
Mukul has to go. Bye, Mukul.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Killy.
Good morning to you all. Thank you for this wonderful film that's been made on this topic, which is very sensitive these days. I think your film will be alive for a few more decades to come.
Sadly.
All is fair and just in love and war. I think the love itself is unfair now in the political language and the political discourse of this nation state. So I hope they don't create a law to define the contours of love and say this is what love is and this has to be there. As they try to infiltrate in almost every arena in the entire society. I think you were talking about the binary opposition. Absolutely. I mean, the society itself had been with these kind of multiple perspectives on love throughout. But what is most striking now is that to smash these alternate or the multiple perspectives and to create a unilinear idea of love is what is very pernicious. That is what the entire political language is talking about. It is not so we can't just kind of say that it has been there. Yeah, it has been there. Absolutely, it has been there. Despite being liberal and educated, there are people who talk still about very conservative in certain areas. There's no doubt about it. There are multiple perspectives there. But what is more dangerous, what I see is basically the turning of these multiple perspectives into a very linear perspective is what is more pernicious. I think we should in fact object to that discourse is what is more important.
Yes, I agree.
So I still remember, I mean, these are not ideas which are just defined by the political organizations by itself. There are these ideas have been there in the socio-cultural discourse within the society. But this socio-cultural discourse is being transformed into a political discourse is what is being done now. So that is and changing that political discourse into a legal term, into a legal discourse is even more obnoxious in the years to come. I think that is where this movie is going to play a very, very significant part as the decades to come in. I still remember, because these are not I could find that girl saying that no, the parks are not the safest places. These are not her own individual opinion. These are actually the acquired consciousness from her domestic life, from her father, from her parents, in turn from the society. So society itself is revolving around these kind of conservative ideas, whether being at one end they'll be very liberal, at different points they'll be very conservative. So it is a choice that they make within the society. So the ideas are not actually being mobilized by political organizations by itself. It is there; they are tapping it. So how do we actually confront this socio-cultural discourse, which is the root cause of this political discourse? Is what we have to look at it, and not just opposing the political discourse itself, which is it is basically a foundation. It is basically a building that is premised on a strong socio-cultural discourse, which had been there for longer centuries. I think that is what is more important, because I still remember saying there's a Tamil writer, Topil Muhammad Miran, who is a Sahitya Academy Award winner. In an interview, I think 2-3 years back, when he was asked about the Muslim youth in Tamil Nadu, he said, I mean, the ideas, the Tamil youth, the recent Tamil youth, are basically from the migration they did post 1990s to the Gulf countries, and the influence of ideas they're getting it from there on Islam is largely affecting the Muslim society in Tamil Nadu. So we had to counter those kind of ideology. This is an interview which was given by that Muslim author. So you get influenced by a lot of ideas within the society. But who influences us, at what point of time, at what point of historical juncture we get influenced is what is more important. How are we going to confront that socio-cultural discourse before getting into the political discourse itself? I think in that significance, your movie will play a very, very major role in bringing multiple perspectives and not just defining the contours of love. Love can never be defined. It can never be brought in within the contours of a language, but trying to bring it is what is more dangerous, that I feel, and I feel this film will be one of the major breakthroughs for this arena, or for this period which is going to come. Thank you very much for the film.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you, Tilly. Okay. Paramita, you said there's another crew member in the team.
Jissy, but she's gone now.
Okay. Oh, sorry. So I think Bila.
Bela. Well, I mean, people should only ask if they want to ask. We've been here for 90 minutes, so maybe people also want to go.
Okay, sure.
Unless somebody wants to ask something,
Yeah. Okay, so I take that cue. If anybody wants to say anything.
Dipali.
Yeah, nothing much to add beyond the fact that the discussion is brilliant, but what I really liked in the last 2 years of knowing you on Facebook and seeing your stuff and reading your stuff is the wisdom and the kindness you bring to the narrative.
Thank you.
What I feel the world needs so much more of.
Thank you.
I mean, kindness. And we need kindness, yes, even if it's a HP guy who offered you chai. It's like, when I was a very young child, my father lived in England, so we had a different emotion of romance and love and the rest. We came back to India when I was 8, and as I was growing up, my cousins had these beautiful arranged marriages, and all was very hunky-dory. And my brother stayed back in England, and he married an English woman. And at that time, my sister and I were the least shocked. I mean, it was expected of them. But my parents thought that he had the Desi upbringing, you know, I mean, he went when he was much older, etc., etc. But for us, it was perfectly normal. She was British, and I mean, they actually, her parents had their own misgivings, my parents had their own misgivings. But they'd get married and they would live together. I mean, they were together until he died, which was some 14 years ago. But, you know, and I also, despite misgivings, finally the main parental concern is happiness of your child. Or at least that's what I think it ought to be. Baki society, see the rest of it has to, I mean, you have to cut off at some point. But it takes time because I was just, after A Suitable Boy, I was looking at Leela Seth's beautiful book on balance, where she writes how she learned from her children. That half the time they were worried about what the servants were saying, what society would say, what other people would say. You know, your children have to be able to tell you that, Mom, Dad, where is my happiness in your thing? And you have to have that equation with your children. And of course, society, I mean, like, I am personally petrified at the thought of this love jihad law. I think it is a criminal law.
No, it is a bad law. Yes, of course. But I think to create an assent against the law, we have to strengthen other aspects of society, right? And what we speak about. I often feel that we speak so much about one thing that we give it a lot of power and space. But we should give space to other things. But I feel that the experience you're talking about your own life, and I'm thinking that my sister, for example, married somebody from a family very different from ours, not so cosmopolitan, which you would traditionally see as conservative. But, you know, they didn't even meet my sister before the wedding. Now, normally what you hear is that the boy and the girl didn't meet each other before the shadi. But here was a shadi where my sister's in-laws met her on the day of the wedding. You know, and they were like, "Hamare bete ne chuni hai, to she must be nice. He must love her." So let's accept it, right? Now, I'm just saying that all of these things also happen in India. There are also families that are quite, so to speak, from the front, traditional and conservative seeming, who are very accepting of their children's choices. And I feel that we do need to present this heterogeneous garden of love and desire that we actually inhabit, and not continuously present stereotypes. I mean, liberal, Samina said before she left that we have seen lots of liberal families objecting to shadis that they didn't find kosher, right? So I don't think it is the domain of anybody to be a jerk.
I also think in India particularly, parents and children mutually have tremendous apprehensions regarding the sexual autonomy of across the generations.
Yeah.
I mean, we both pretend that it doesn't exist, unfortunately.
I think what's interesting is that, you know, a lot of young people, like on Agents of Ishq, a lot of young people are talking about how we want our parents to accept this, that, and the other about us. But if you say, shall we talk about the sex life of parents? Everybody's like, no, I don't want to hear about it. So you already know the limits of your own openness, right? And we all have it somewhere or the other. So I think, yes.
We don't parent to be remarrying is often a great cause of concern for them.
Yeah. So I think that, I think desire and sex is a very interesting part of life, because we see people's capacities to be both very accepting and both very narrow-minded, opposite to what is the social stereotype of who is narrow-minded and who is accepting.
Yes. Often they are both at the same time, the same person,
yes.
the same at the same time.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Cognitive dissonance happening.
Yeah, surely.
Wonderful conversation today, Paru. I loved it.
Thank you for coming to it. You're so kind. You come to everybody's events. It's amazing.
Leela for this. She messaged me, so I said, no, this I have to see.
मैं इस कहानी की हनुमान हूँ ना.
Yes, Anila's favorite Hanuman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deepali. Okay, so I think if it's already almost 12:47.
Yes.
1 hour 45 minutes.
Yeah, time for mutton curry and rice.
Yeah, Sunday. So if nobody has any comments or questions, shall we wind up?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I would let me formally thank all of you.
Thank you.
So thank you all. And as I said in the beginning, we have been showing the online film screening from April. This film will be on till tomorrow evening 6 o'clock. Please tell your friends. Please share the news to other friends. As Paramita said, many of our friends have not are watching the film first time. So please remind others. I think one more friend is joining, Marjorie. Can
Marjorie.
you just
But now we'll have to say hi and bye to Marge.
Yeah, just tell her bye and bye.
Hi and bye, Marjorie.
So,
Yeah.
so if Marjorie doesn't have anything to say, then we can wind up. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you, Paramita.
Thank you.
Mukul. Thank you, everybody. So thanks a lot. See you next Sunday. Every weekend we are showing a film. So see you next Sunday. Thank you.
Thank you.